Hey guys, it's me here from World War Wisdom, and I'm here with Jared, the host of Real History. Today we're going to be talking about some film topics. That's typically what they cover on their page, and we'll be doing some World War II reenacting discussions as well and tying the two together. So, Jared, why don't you tell us a little bit about D-Day and how that's portrayed in film and how you've covered that on your channel.
So we're at the perfect venue to be discussing this here at D-Day Conneaut in Ohio, one of the largest World War II reenactments to be found on the planet. And as we think about how this historical event has been depicted in cinema over the years, it's been portrayed in a variety of different flavors throughout the generations. One of the first that I ever saw that comes to mind is a movie from 1956, which is called D-Day, the 6th of June. And it's not a great movie. It's about a love triangle between a British woman, an American officer, and a British officer. And then it culminates with those two men having to put their differences aside to participate in the invasion together, which is just a bunch of malarkey when you think about it.
I have to admit, I have not seen that one. Is it worth the watch?
You should see it at least once, just out of pure curiosity.
Put it on the list.
Yeah. One of the absolute greatest, though, is The Longest Day from 1962, produced by Darryl F. Zanuck. This is not a movie without its flaws. It takes liberties, it condenses storylines, but just the sheer scale of it is so impressive. A cast of thousands, in some cases filmed in the actual locations throughout Normandy. We've done a full review of it on Real History. It's definitely worth checking out if you've never seen it. There are some lesser-known films about D-Day as well. There's one from the 1970s called Overlord. That, too, is not a really great one. It's more of a psychological drama about how soldiers, in this case a British soldier, prepares for war. And throughout the 80s and in the first half of the 1990s, there's not too many World War II films after the Vietnam War. That all changes, though, with Saving Private Ryan in 1998, which got so many young people, myself included, further interested in history. And then, of course, Band of Brothers is the spin-off of that, which also magnificently portrays the Normandy invasion. So here, too, those are films not without our flaws, as we've discussed on Real History. But the important thing is that they get people interested. It got veterans to open up and talk about their experiences. And it served as a gateway for an up-and-coming generation of historians. And I think for that reason, all of these films are worth talking about.
Yeah, and for us as reenactors, obviously you said this is the perfect place to talk about this at this reenactment. When we're out here talking to people about what actually happened in D-Day and the Second World War in general, it's such a helpful tool for us to have movies, even with their slight inaccuracies, that tell the story properly and show some of the details that are sprinkled in there, like Band of Brothers, Saving Private Ryan, The Pacific. And that's a great tool for us to tell people, oh, you know, this item here, well, you know that scene in Saving Private Ryan when they're using it. And it really helps people connect the dots when you've seen it on the big screen. Obviously, there's some things on the big screen we can't replicate in reenactments. And then they get to come here and see it in person, where there's things that they see in person that you can't see in the movies. So it's really a piece of the puzzle, and linking those two things together, I think, helps somebody who maybe hasn't done the research on World War II or is just getting into it. It starts connecting those dots and giving a more well-rounded picture of what happened.
Absolutely. I always think film is a useful reference point. I draw those sorts of conclusions in the classroom all the time. And I think in a way historians are duty-bound to use movies as conversation pieces to further people's understanding or to offer context or clear misconceptions. So,
absolutely.
Good conversation to have.
So speaking of misconceptions, we wanted to talk about some of the things that are maybe not misconceptions, but things that maybe happened at some point and appear in films that have become blown up due to their being on the big screen.
Classic war movie tropes.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Said it better than I did. So at a reenactment like this, you'll see many of those little tropes from the big screen popping up, even on reenactors.
So what comes to mind?
Well, I got the help of my unit with this, and we tried to make a list, not all inclusive, but a couple of the biggest things we could think about that you see at reenactments that maybe popped up from the big screen. So
Okay.
I'm going to pull out some photos.
All right, I'm looking forward to the list here.
Don't accost me.
You didn't use it on a typewriter? You didn't put it on a typewriter? I'm so disappointed. All right. Okay.
Don't report me to my CEO.
Okay, all right.
All right, the first thing, the War Daddy haircut from Fury.
Oh, yeah, there's so many tropes in Fury.
Yeah, Fury is a big source of them. But I've talked in the past on my page a couple videos about period accurate haircuts and how guys would typically cut their hair, and it was a little different than the modern day military. And it was definitely short on the sides, long on the top, but I think Brad Pitt's example of that was maybe a little more than you would typically see. Haircut like that I had never ever seen at a reenactment up until the release date of that movie. Now you see every reenactor wants to get that.
That's a good one.
Yeah, and I'll admit that it looks cool. I'm not saying I've never thought about it, but maybe a little overdone from a historical perspective.
Yeah. I would say another thing, too, that Hollywood has had a huge influence on when you come to a reenactment like this is just the preponderance, the overwhelming number of airborne and ranger reenactors.
Yes.
They made up such a small portion of the overall military forces in the European theater of operations, yet they're probably consisting of about half of the representations here at events like this. And so popular culture and film play a huge role in determining what reenactors like this make their impression out of. I'm not saying that to knock them or anything like that. I think they serve a very valuable tool here. But they sometimes do it at the neglect of other fighting units who will never get a movie made about them.
Yeah, the vast majority of the military in World War II was not specialized units going off on their own operations, and I get why films want to focus on those things.
They're exciting, dramatic stories.
It makes for a good movie. But yeah, some specific examples of that, of course, Band of Brothers, 101st Airborne, Easy Company especially. Huge surge in popularity of seeing that spade on the helmet at World War II reenactments after Band of Brothers came out.
I think we see the same thing in regard to Navy SEALs, the fascination that people have with Navy SEALs. Like, they're the elite, they're the best trained.
Yeah.
And World War II paratroopers were the 1940s equivalent of that. And so I think there's a fascination with the elite, and that's what motivates a lot of people to pick the representations they do.
And you could say the same thing. Obviously, we're talking from a U.S. reenactor's perspective, and I maybe notice more of those details, but the guys they're fighting, too. It seems like in the war movies, so often they're fighting the Waffen-SS, the Fallschirmjäger, all these specialized units, and not just your general Heer divisions that made up the majority of the German army.
Any others come to mind?
Well, along with that, this was one I had on my list that kind of ties into that. Not just the groups and the people that you're representing, but what they were doing. So we talked about specialized units doing these operations and fighting all the time, and what's the majority of a World War II soldier's day filled with? Not action and combat, not running behind enemy lines.
Lots of tedium.
Yeah, not jumping out of airplanes.
Lots of paperwork.
Yeah, paperwork and eating your rations. And it's understandable.
Doesn't make for an exciting movie.
Yeah. I don't think anyone's gonna make saving K-ration box or anything like that.
Yeah. Well, and our producer on Real History, Andy, was an Army mechanic who served in Iraq, and something profound that I think he said is that nobody's ever going to make a movie about my unit, about guys fixing Humvees or anything like that. So I think it's important to consider those other facets of service. It's not just elite guys, it's a team effort, and I think reenactments are really good venues to discuss that sort of stuff.
I agree. Yeah, we kind of see the tip of the iceberg on the big screen, and maybe not the Red Ball Express, the mechanics, the supply lines, and those guys in those elite units, they were thinking about where their next meal was coming from, where their ammo was coming from. And
there's an old movie. There is a Red Ball Express movie. It's from the early 1950s. So kind of another obscure one to possibly check out.
That is a good one. What about tapping your mag on your helmet. That's a very specific one.
That's a good one, yeah.
I'm not saying nobody ever did that.
Ryben and his BAR?
Absolutely. And I'll admit that yesterday on the beach, when we were doing the reenactment, I found sand in one of my end block clips and had to tap it out. But nowadays, if you look, you might see every guy tapping the mag. I'm not saying nobody did that, but it was not every single
That's a good one. Now, are you wearing socks or did you make sticky bombs?
This is good. Now we got to surrender our socks.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah?
I do have my socks on.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Every GI needs several pair of dry socks. That's
Absolutely.
I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah, and I will say in the past, I don't know that anyone was actually dipping a sock in axle grease like you see in Saving Private Ryan, but they do sell replicas of those. And one time, I have a video on my page of me hucking one into a German half-track at a reenactment. So thankfully, I didn't even have to sacrifice one of my own socks for that.
And the list goes on and on and on, and they fold into other war movie tropes and the sort of platoon-type movies. You always have the guy from Brooklyn. You always have the little guy who's picked on. You have the bigoted sergeant who overcomes, his prejudice. There's so many things that tie in with Hollywood, and they're all representations of popular culture. Well,
thanks so much for setting this up today. It was really great to talk to you. You have such a good channel set up with so many deep dives into movies, and I like to pick out some of those details, but the way that you go through it step by step on your channel, I really appreciate that. And if any of you out there haven't checked them out yet, you should definitely do that. I'll put the link in the description of this video.
Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely, great talking to you.
All right. Thank you.
All right.